A billionaire pretended to be poor for one day. Only a single mom shared her last meal with her. Ethan Hart had never gone hungry in his life. Not once. Not even as a kid. So when his own head of operations laughed during a board meeting and said, "People who stay poor just don't work hard enough. It's that simple," Ethan didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just sat there, quiet, watching 12 other executives nod along like it was obvious. Like it was fact. That night, he couldn't sleep. Ethan Hart was 38 years old. He owned one of the largest logistics companies in the country, thousands of trucks, tens of thousands of employees, a net worth with more zeros than most people could count. He had built all of it from nothing, and maybe that was the problem. He'd built it from nothing, so somewhere along the way, he'd started believing the lie too. That anyone could do what he did. That poverty was a choice. But something about the way his executive said it, so casually, so sure of himself, sat wrong in Ethan's chest like a stone he couldn't swallow. So he decided to find out the truth himself. Not through reports. Not through a documentary crew or a PR stunt with cameras hidden in his tie. He wanted the real thing. No safety net. No exit plan. The next morning, before the sun had even fully risen, Ethan stood in his walk-in closet, holding two very different lives in his hands. In one hand, his phone, his wallet, a watch worth more than most people's yearly salary. In the other, a torn gray hoodie, a pair of jeans with a hole at the knee, and a backpack he hadn't touched since college. He put the watch down first, then the wallet, then the phone. By the time he stepped out of his penthouse building, he wasn't Ethan Hart, founder and CEO, anymore. He was just a man in worn-out clothes with nothing in his pockets and nowhere he had to be. For the first time in 20 years, nobody was waiting for his instructions. Nobody needed his signature. Nobody even looked at him. That last part hit harder than he expected. By 9 in the morning, he'd learned something his money had always shielded him from: invisibility. He walked past the same coffee shop he used to have his assistant order from every single day, and the barista who once knew his order by heart didn't even glance up. He stepped inside a restaurant lobby just to get out of the cold air, and within seconds a staff member was already walking toward him, not to help, but to ask him to leave. "We don't have anything for you here," the man said, not unkindly, just automatically. Like Ethan wasn't even a person who needed an answer. Just a problem that needed removing. Nobody made eye contact. Office workers in sharp suits, the same kind Ethan wore every single day of his real life, walked past him like he was a lamppost. A woman actually stepped off the sidewalk and crossed the street just to avoid getting close to him. By noon, his stomach was aching in a way he didn't recognize. Actual hunger. Not, "I skipped brunch for a meeting" hunger. Real hunger, the kind that made his hands feel unsteady and his thoughts go a little foggy. He found a public park a few blocks from downtown and sat on a bench near the edge, away from the joggers and the parents with strollers, in a spot where he could disappear a little. That's when he saw her. A woman in her mid-30s, wearing a simple work uniform from a grocery store, sat down at a bench close by with a small lunch bag. She looked tired, the kind of tired that lived deep in someone's shoulders, not just their eyes. But there was something steady about her too, like exhaustion hadn't managed to take away her softness. She noticed him almost immediately. Not with fear, not with disgust, just noticing, the way you'd notice anyone. Ethan expected her to look away like everyone else had all morning. She didn't. Instead, she opened her lunch bag, pulled out a simple homemade sandwich, and without a single question, split it cleanly in half. "Here," she said, holding it out to him like it was the most normal thing in the world. "You look like you could use this more than me today." Ethan just stared at her hand for a second, stunned into silence. Not because of the sandwich, because after an entire morning of being invisible, one stranger had looked straight at him and decided he mattered. He hadn't said a single word yet, and somehow, she'd already given him more than anyone else had all day. "Thank you," he finally managed, his voice rougher than he expected. "You didn't have to do that." The woman just smiled, like it wasn't a big deal at all. "Nobody has to do anything," she said. "That's kind of the point." Ethan took the sandwich with both hands, and for the first time all day, he felt like an actual person again. He had no idea yet that this simple gesture, one sandwich, split in half, given without a second thought, was about to change the direction of both of their lives forever. Ethan ate slowly, savoring the sandwich more than he'd savored meals that cost more than most people's rent. There was nothing special about it, just bread, cheese, and a little mustard, but it tasted like something he didn't have a word for yet. The woman didn't ask him anything. She didn't ask where he slept, how long he'd been on the streets, or why he looked a little too clean for someone who was supposedly homeless. She just ate her half of the sandwich beside him, looking out at the joggers and the pigeons fighting over crumbs, like sharing a bench with a stranger was the most ordinary thing in the world. "I'm Maya," she said eventually, not extending a hand, just offering the name like a small gift. "Ethan," he replied. It was strange, using his real first name. He almost hadn't. But something about her felt safe enough to be honest with, even in small ways. "You work at the grocery store?" he asked, nodding at the faded logo stitched onto her uniform shirt. "Yeah, evenings, mostly. I do mornings somewhere else too, a laundromat a few blocks from my apartment. Folding other people's clothes for 8 hours before I come here and scan groceries for 8 more." She said it plainly, no self-pity in her voice, like she was describing the weather. "That's a lot," Ethan said. Maya shrugged. "It's what pays the bills. Most of them, anyway." He wanted to ask more, but something told him not to push. So instead, he just let the silence sit there comfortably between them, and after a moment, she kept talking anyway, not because he'd asked, but because it seemed like she just needed somewhere to put the words. "My husband passed away 4 years ago," she said. "Car accident. Wasn't even his fault. The other driver ran a red light." She looked down at her hands for a second. "After that, it was just me and my daughter. She's 7 now. Smart as anything. Wants to be a marine biologist, which is funny because we've never even been to the ocean." Ethan felt something twist in his chest. He thought about his own daughter. No, he didn't have one. He thought about the 100 dinners he'd sat through with executives complaining about tax brackets and stock performance, and how none of it had ever sounded like this. Like real life. "That must be hard," he said quietly. "Raising her alone." "It is," Maya admitted. "But she's the reason I get up every morning. So I can't really complain about it," she smiled. But it didn't quite reach her eyes this time. "Some months are harder than others. There was a stretch last year where I wasn't sure we'd make rent. I picked up extra shifts, sold a few things we didn't need. We got through it." Ethan studied her for a moment. There was no bitterness in her voice, no anger at the world for handing her a life this heavy. Just quiet endurance, like she'd made peace with carrying it. "Doesn't it make you angry?" he asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. "Working this hard and still barely getting by?" Maya thought about it for a second, genuinely considering the question instead of brushing it off. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Late at night, when I'm exhausted and the bills don't add up, yeah, it makes me angry. But being angry doesn't pay the electric bill. So I get up the next day and I keep going. What else is there to do?" Ethan didn't have an answer for that. In his world, problems got solved with money, with lawyers, with a phone call to the right person. Maya's problems didn't work that way. Her problems required her to physically keep showing up, day after day, exhausted, and there was no amount of hard work that seemed to be enough to break the cycle. It made him uncomfortable in a way he wasn't used to. Uncomfortable with himself. "I should get going," Maya said eventually, glancing at a cheap watch on her wrist. "My shift starts soon." She stood, brushing crumbs off her uniform, and reached into her lunch bag one more time. She pulled out a small apple and a couple of grapes, the only things left inside, and held them out to Ethan. "Here," she said, "just in case dinner doesn't happen today." Ethan looked at the fruit, then at her. "You should keep this for yourself. You already gave me half your lunch." Maya just shook her head, smiling. "I'll be fine. I've got dinner waiting for me at home. You don't know where your next meal's coming from." "I do." She said it so simply, like it wasn't even a decision she'd had to think about. Like giving away food she probably needed just as much as he did was instinct, not sacrifice. Ethan took the fruit slowly, his throat tightening in a way he didn't fully understand. "Thank you, Maya," he said. "Really, don't mention it," she said, already turning to leave. "Take care of yourself, okay?" He watched her walk away, disappearing into the crowd of people heading back to their afternoons, completely unaware that the stranger she'd just fed was one of the wealthiest men in the country, and that her small, unremarkable act of kindness was about to unravel her entire life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Because Ethan wasn't going to walk away and forget her. He was going to find out everything about her. The next morning, Ethan Hart walked back into his office building wearing a suit instead of a hoodie, and it felt stranger than the day before had. The doorman greeted him by name. The elevator recognized his access badge before he even tapped it. Everyone looked at him now, the exact opposite of yesterday, and for the first time, that attention felt uncomfortable instead of normal. He barely acknowledged the "good morning, sir," from the front desk. His mind was still on a park bench, on half a sandwich, on a woman who'd given away her lunch to a stranger without a second thought. By 9:15, he was in his office with the door closed, and by 9:20, he'd called in the one person at the company he trusted completely, his chief of staff, Daniel Reyes. Daniel had worked with Ethan for over a decade. He'd seen him make brutal business decisions without blinking, negotiate multi-million-dollar contracts over a single phone call, and fire people he genuinely liked because the numbers demanded it. Daniel had never once seen Ethan look like this, unsettled, distracted, almost nervous. "You look like you saw a ghost," Daniel said, setting his tablet down on the desk. "Not a ghost," Ethan said. "Something else." He told Daniel everything. The disguise, the invisibility, the restaurant that turned him away, the woman on the bench who hadn't hesitated for even a second before splitting her sandwich in half. Daniel listened without interrupting, though his eyebrows lifted more than once. When Ethan finished, he leaned back in his chair, quiet for a moment. "So what do you want to do?" Daniel finally asked. "Send her flowers? A check? What's the plan here?" "I don't know yet," Ethan admitted. "But I want you to find out who she is. Everything about her. Her full name, her background, her financial situation. Quietly. I don't want her knowing anyone's looking into her." Daniel frowned slightly. "You want me to investigate a woman you met yesterday on a park bench?" "Yes." "Ethan, that's—" "I know how it sounds." Ethan cut in, his voice sharper than he intended. "But something about her doesn't add up. She works 2 jobs. She's exhausted in a way that goes beyond just being tired. And she still gave away food she probably needed more than I did. I want to understand her situation before I do anything. If I just hand her money, I might be solving the wrong problem." Daniel studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Give me a couple of days." It took less than that. By the following afternoon, Daniel walked back into Ethan's office with a folder thick enough to make Ethan sit up straighter. He'd expected simple facts, an address, a job history, maybe some unpaid bills. What Daniel had found was something else entirely. "Her name is Maya Brooks," Daniel began, sliding the folder across the desk. 34 years old. Widowed 4 years ago, 1 daughter. Currently works 2 jobs, evening shifts at a grocery store, mornings at a laundromat. Nothing unusual there. But here's where it gets complicated. Ethan opened the folder and started scanning the documents inside. 6 years ago, Maya worked as a senior accounts associate at a mid-sized logistics distribution company, Halden Freight Solutions, Daniel continued. She was good at her job. Promoted twice in 3 years. Then, out of nowhere, she was accused of financial misconduct. Accused of mishandling company funds, allegedly moving money between accounts to cover personal debts. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he read further. "It says here the police investigated and found no criminal evidence." Correct. No charges were ever filed. But the accusation alone was enough to destroy her professional reputation. The company terminated her immediately, citing trust concerns. They never publicly retracted the accusation, even after the investigation cleared her. And once something like that gets attached to your name, it follows you. Every job application after that, background checks flagged the allegation. Nobody wanted to take the risk of hiring someone accused of financial fraud, even without a conviction. Ethan sat back slowly, the pieces settling into a shape he didn't like at all. "So she went from a stable accounting career to scanning groceries and folding laundry," he said quietly. "Because of an accusation that was never even proven." "That's the short version, yes." Ethan flipped through more pages. Termination letters, a copy of the original internal complaint, a brief note about the case being closed due to insufficient evidence. Something about the timeline nagged at him. The accusation had surfaced suspiciously fast, right after Maya's promotion, right after she'd apparently flagged some financial discrepancies in a quarterly report. "Dig deeper into this," Ethan said, tapping the folder. I want to know exactly what happened at that company before she was accused. Who reported the irregularities first? Who benefited from her being removed? Daniel raised an eyebrow. You think someone set her up? I think, Ethan said slowly, that a woman who gives away her lunch to a stranger doesn't sound like someone capable of stealing from a company. And I want to know who decided her life wasn't worth protecting. He wasn't ready to reveal himself to Maya yet. Not until he understood the whole truth. Because if someone had deliberately destroyed her reputation to cover their own tracks, Ethan intended to find out exactly who, and make sure they answered for it. 2 days passed before Ethan allowed himself to see Maya again. He told himself he was giving Daniel time to dig deeper into Halden Freight Solutions. But the truth was simpler than that. He wanted to understand her life before he decided what to do about it. So on the 4th evening, he put the gray hoodie back on. The grocery store was smaller than he expected, tucked between a pharmacy and a shuttered electronics shop, the kind of place that survived on regulars rather than foot traffic. Ethan stood across the street for a while, watching through the windows before he finally walked in, keeping his head low, pretending to browse the cereal aisle. Maya was at register 3. Her uniform looked slightly wrinkled, like she hadn't had time to iron it between jobs. But her posture was straight, her voice patient, even with the customers who clearly tested that patience. An elderly man in front of her fumbled through his coupons, holding up the line while people behind him sighed and shifted their weight. Maya didn't rush him. She helped him sort through which coupons had expired, waited while he counted out exact change coin by coin, and thanked him warmly when he finally finished, like he hadn't just held up an entire line of impatient customers. A few minutes later, a young mother approached with a cart of groceries and a baby balanced on her hip. When her card declined at the register, panic flashed across her face. Ethan watched Maya glance at the total, then quietly slide a $10 bill from her own apron pocket toward the register before the woman even had a chance to start apologizing. Don't worry about it, Maya said gently. Get your baby fed. We'll sort the rest out next time. The young mother tried to protest, but Maya waved her off with a small, tired smile, already scanning the next customer's items. Ethan stood frozen by the cereal boxes, stunned. Maya was barely getting by herself. He'd read the numbers in Daniel's report, her rent, her bills, the tight margin she lived on every single month. And yet she'd just handed over money she probably needed, without a second of hesitation, exactly the way she'd handed him half a sandwich on a park bench. It wasn't a performance. There was no one there to impress. She thought she was just another tired cashier at the end of a long shift, completely unaware that anyone was watching closely enough to notice what she'd just done. He left the store before she could recognize him, his chest tight in a way he still didn't have words for. Later that night, Ethan found himself parked a block away from the store, waiting until her shift ended near 10. When Maya walked out, exhaustion visible in every step, she headed toward a bus stop instead of a car. Ethan followed on foot, staying far enough back to respect her privacy, close enough to understand. She waited 15 minutes for a bus that finally arrived half empty, and Ethan watched her sit near the back, resting her head against the window, eyes closed for the entire ride. He didn't get on. Instead, he had Daniel track the bus route and quietly meet him a few stops down, where they picked up her trail again on foot toward a modest apartment building with peeling paint and a broken security gate that didn't lock properly. Ethan stayed across the street, watching through a window on the 2nd floor as lights flicked on. A small girl, no older than 7, with 2 uneven braids and a gap-toothed smile, ran to the door the moment Maya stepped inside. Even from a distance, Ethan could see Maya's whole body change the second she saw her daughter. The exhaustion didn't disappear, but something softer replaced it. She picked the girl up despite clearly aching muscles, spinning her once before setting her back down, laughing at something the girl said that Ethan couldn't hear. For a moment, watching them together, Ethan felt like an intruder on something private and sacred. He almost turned to leave, but he stayed a little longer, watching the silhouette of Maya making dinner, helping with homework at the kitchen table, tucking her daughter in for the night. And then, after the apartment quieted and the little girl's light went dark, Maya's silhouette moved to a small desk near the window, where she opened a laptop and stayed there for nearly an hour. Ethan couldn't see the screen, but he didn't need to. He already knew, from Daniel's research, exactly what she was doing. Job applications. Dozens of them, probably, sent into a void that kept rejecting her because of an accusation that was never even proven true. Night after night, after 2 full jobs and a full day of parenting, she was still fighting for something better. Eventually, her light went out too. Ethan stood on that dark street for a long time afterward, hands in his pockets, staring up at a now-quiet window. He'd spent years believing hard work was the difference between success and failure. Maya worked harder than almost anyone he'd ever met. And still, every door kept closing on her, not because of anything she'd done, but because of a lie someone else had let stick to her name. Whatever Daniel found in those old company records, Ethan decided right then, he wasn't just going to fix Maya's life with money. He was going to fix what had been broken first. Daniel called 2 days later, and the moment Ethan heard his voice on the phone, he knew they'd found something. "You need to see this in person," Daniel said. "Not over the phone." Ethan met him that evening, not at the office, but at the private law firm he'd quietly hired to dig through Halden Freight Solutions' old records, a small, discreet firm led by an investigative attorney named Priya Nandan, who specialized in corporate fraud cases nobody wanted made public. Priya's office was lined with file boxes, the kind of place that smelled like old paper and stale coffee. She didn't waste time with small talk. 6 years ago, Maya Brooks was a senior accounts associate at Halden Freight. Priya began, spreading documents across the table. She'd been there 4 years, promoted twice, well-regarded by her direct team. Then, during a routine quarterly review, she noticed inconsistencies in 3 separate shipping contracts. Invoices that didn't match delivery records, payments routed to vendor accounts that didn't seem to exist. She reported it, Ethan said, already sensing where this was going. She reported it internally, exactly like she was supposed to, Priya confirmed. Followed procedure. Sent it up through her direct supervisor, a man named Gregory Voss, who was head of finance at the time. And 3 weeks later, Maya was the one being investigated. Not the discrepancies. Her. Daniel slid a document across the table, an internal memo dated just after Maya's original report, accusing her of manipulating account transfers for personal financial gain. The language was careful, professional, damning. The accusation claimed Maya had been diverting small amounts from vendor payments into a personal account to cover debts after her husband's death, Priya continued. It was specific enough to sound credible, believable enough that HR moved fast. Ethan felt his jaw tighten, but the police investigation found nothing. Correct. No criminal charges were ever filed, because there was no actual evidence linking Maya to any of it. But by the time that clearance came through, months later, Maya had already been terminated. The damage was done. So who actually took the money? Priya pulled out another folder, this one thicker, filled with financial statements and internal audit trails that Ethan barely understood the technical details of, but the conclusion was clear enough. Gregory Voss and 2 other senior managers had been quietly funneling funds through shell vendor accounts for nearly 2 years before Maya noticed anything, Priya said. When she flagged the discrepancies, they panicked. Instead of covering their tracks quietly, they needed a fast, convincing scapegoat, someone whose access to the accounts made her a believable suspect, and someone without the resources to fight back. Maya, Ethan said quietly. Maya, Priya confirmed. A recent widow, raising a child alone, without connections or legal resources to challenge a company with far more money and far better lawyers than she had. She was the perfect target. Convenient timing, plausible motive on paper, and no way to defend herself against accusations that got buried in company records instead of ever being properly investigated. Ethan sat back, the full picture settling over him like something cold and heavy. What happened to Voss and the others? All 3 resigned quietly within 6 months of Maya's termination, Priya said, before the internal investigation could formally conclude. No public record of wrongdoing. Voss now runs a private consulting firm 2 states over. The other 2 moved to different companies entirely, careers intact. And the company never corrected the record? Never told anyone Maya wasn't responsible. Correcting it would have meant admitting their own internal investigation was flawed and reopening questions about how the actual fraud went undetected for 2 years, Priya said. It was easier for everyone at Halden to let the accusation fade quietly than to properly clear her name. Nobody powerful had any incentive to fix it, so they didn't. Ethan sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the documents spread across the table. Years of Maya's life reduced to memos and termination letters, while the people actually responsible had walked away untouched, their reputations fully intact. He thought about her that day on the park bench, sharing half a sandwich without hesitation. He thought about the $10 she'd quietly slipped toward a stranger's grocery bill just days ago. He thought about her sitting at that small desk near the window every night, applying for jobs that kept rejecting her because of a lie 3 men had built to save themselves. "I want everything documented properly," Ethan said finally, his voice steady but harder than before. "Every account, every transfer, every signature. I want this airtight before anyone else sees it." "That'll take time," Priya said. "A few more weeks, at minimum, to build something that would hold up publicly and legally." "Take the time," Ethan said. "But I want it done right. Not just enough to clear her name quietly, enough to make sure nobody can ever bury it again." Daniel studied him carefully. "You still haven't told her who you are." "Not yet," Ethan said. "Not until I understand exactly what she's been carrying, and not until I can fix it completely instead of halfway." He gathered the folder himself this time, holding the weight of Maya's stolen years in his hands. Somewhere out there, 3 men were living comfortable lives built on top of the reputation they destroyed to protect themselves. Ethan intended to make sure that comfort didn't last much longer. Ethan hadn't planned on volunteering. But when Daniel mentioned that Maya occasionally spent her rare free Saturdays helping serve meals at a community kitchen downtown, he found himself signing up before he'd fully thought it through. He arrived early, in the same worn hoodie, hair a little messier than usual, and slipped into the back kitchen where a volunteer coordinator handed him an apron without asking a single question. Nobody here cared who he used to be. They just needed hands. He was ladling soup into paper bowls when Maya walked in 20 minutes later, tying her hair back, laughing at something another volunteer said. When she spotted him across the counter, her whole face lit up with genuine surprise. "Hey, it's you," she said, walking over immediately. "The sandwich guy." "Guilty," Ethan said, feeling an unexpected warmth spread through his chest at being remembered so easily. "You volunteer here?" she asked, grabbing an apron from the hook beside him. "First time," Ethan admitted. "Figured I'd give something back instead of just taking." Maya smiled at that, settling into the station beside him, and for the next 2 hours, they worked side by side, serving soup and bread to a steady line of people. Elderly men who came for the company as much as the food, tired parents with kids in tow, a few regulars whom Maya greeted by name. "You come here a lot?" Ethan asked during a lull. "Whenever I can," Maya said. "Between the 2 jobs and my daughter, free time's rare. But this feels different from just clocking in somewhere. People here actually need what you're giving them, and you get to see it happen in real time." "How's everything else going?" Ethan asked carefully. "Since we last talked." Maya paused for a moment, wiping her hands on her apron. "Honestly, about the same. Still applying for better jobs. Still not hearing back from most of them." She said it lightly, without complaint, but Ethan caught the tired edge underneath it. "But we're managing. My daughter's doing well in school. That's the important part." Ethan wanted so badly to tell her everything right then, that he knew about Halden Freight, about Gregory Voss, about the men who'd stolen her reputation to protect their own. But Priya's investigation wasn't finished yet, and he'd promised himself he'd fix this completely or not at all. So instead, he asked a different question, one that had been sitting with him since he'd watched her hand a stranger $10 she probably needed herself. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Do you ever regret it? Helping people, I mean, when you've got so little yourself. Does it ever feel like it's not worth it?" Maya considered the question seriously, not brushing it off the way most people would. "I used to think about that a lot, actually," she said. "Right after my husband died, money was tighter than it had ever been, and I remember standing in line at a shelter myself for a few weeks before I found steady work again. People helped me during that time. Strangers, mostly. A woman gave me a winter coat for my daughter when I couldn't afford one. Someone else paid for our groceries once when my card got declined, just like what happened here the other night." She glanced sideways at him, not realizing he already knew about that moment. "So I guess I just figured, once I got back on my feet, I'd do the same for someone else when I could," she continued. It's not really about having extra to give. It's more like paying forward what kept me going when I had nothing. But doesn't it worry you? Ethan pressed gently. Giving away money or food you might need yourself? Maya shook her head slowly. If I only helped people when it was convenient, it wouldn't really mean anything, would it? Kindness loses its meaning the second you start expecting something back for it, or the second you only give when it doesn't cost you anything, she shrugged, ladling soup into another bowl. Besides, we've always found a way through. Somehow. It always works out, even when it doesn't seem like it will. Ethan stayed quiet for a moment, letting her words settle over him. He thought about every business decision he'd ever made, every calculated risk, every deal weighed carefully against potential loss. Maya operated on something entirely different, a kind of generosity that didn't calculate anything at all, that gave first and figured out the consequences later, if at all. It wasn't recklessness. It was something closer to faith, not in luck, but in people, in the idea that kindness circulated back around eventually, even if it took a strange, roundabout path to return. You're a good person, Maya, Ethan said quietly. She laughed, a little embarrassed. I'm just a regular person. There's a difference. Maybe not as much of one as you think, Ethan said. Their shift ended a while later, the kitchen quieting as the last of the evening's guests filtered out. As they untied their aprons, Maya turned to him one more time. It was good seeing you again, she said. I hope things are looking up for you too. Ethan watched her walk toward the door, completely unaware that within days, the truth about her stolen years was finally going to surface, and that the man scooping soup beside her all afternoon was about to change her life in a way she couldn't possibly imagine yet. He just hoped, when the moment came, she'd understand why he'd waited this long to tell her everything. The invitation arrived at Maya's apartment on a Tuesday, printed on thick cream cardstock that looked out of place next to her stack of bills. A local charity foundation was hosting its annual appreciation ceremony, honoring volunteers across the city who'd given their time to community programs. Maya's name had been submitted by the coordinators at the soup kitchen, who'd apparently been keeping track of her Saturdays for longer than she realized. She almost didn't go. Between her 2 jobs and her daughter, finding a babysitter and something appropriate to wear felt like more effort than it was worth for what she assumed would be a small, quiet gathering. But her neighbor offered to watch her daughter for the evening, and a coworker lent her a simple navy dress that fit well enough. And so on a Friday evening 12 days after she'd shared her sandwich with a stranger on a park bench, Maya found herself walking into a hotel ballroom she never could have afforded to enter on her own. The room was larger than she expected. Round tables draped in white cloth, string lights overhead, well-dressed guests mingling with wine glasses in hand. Maya felt distinctly out of place, tugging at the sleeve of her borrowed dress, until one of the kitchen coordinators spotted her and pulled her toward a table near the front, introducing her to other volunteers being honored that night. She assumed, reasonably, that this was simply a nice gesture, a dinner, a certificate maybe, a chance to feel appreciated for a change. She had no idea the evening had been arranged around her. The lights dimmed slightly as the program began. A woman at the podium thanked everyone for attending, spoke briefly about the foundation's mission, and then introduced the keynote speaker for the evening, a name that made the entire room straighten up and applaud before he'd even walked on stage. Please welcome Ethan Hart, founder and CEO of Hart Logistics, and tonight's keynote speaker. Maya's stomach dropped somewhere near the floor. She watched, frozen, as a man walked across the stage in a perfectly tailored suit, the kind of suit that cost more than she made in 3 months combined. His hair was different, styled instead of tousled. His posture was different, confident instead of tired. But his face was unmistakable, exactly the face she'd shared a sandwich with on a park bench less than 2 weeks ago, the same face she'd worked beside at the soup kitchen just days before. Ethan adjusted the microphone, scanning the room briefly before he began speaking, and Maya sat completely still, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain the people at her table could hear it. 2 weeks ago, Ethan began, I did something that probably sounds strange for someone in my position. I left behind my phone, my wallet, everything that made me who I am on paper, and I spent a day walking through this city as a homeless man. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Maya's hands had gone cold. I did it because I'd heard someone say that people who stay poor simply don't work hard enough, Ethan continued. And I wanted to know if that was true. So I spent a day finding out exactly how this city treats someone with nothing. He talked about the restaurant that turned him away, the coffee shop where he'd once been a regular customer, completely unrecognized, the office workers who wouldn't meet his eyes, the woman who'd crossed the street to avoid him. By noon, I was hungry in a way I'd never actually experienced before, he said. And out of every single person I passed that day, hundreds of people, in one of the busiest parts of this city, exactly one person stopped. Maya's throat tightened. She knew, with absolute certainty now, exactly where this story was going. A woman sitting on a park bench, on her lunch break, working 2 jobs to support herself and her daughter after losing her husband. Ethan said, his voice steady but unmistakably emotional now, looked at a stranger who had nothing, and without asking a single question about who he was or why he needed help, she split her only meal in half and gave it to him. The room had gone completely silent. She didn't ask for anything in return, Ethan continued. She didn't even ask my name until after she'd already fed me. Before she left, she gave me the last of her fruit too, just in case I didn't have anything for dinner. She had less than almost anyone else I encountered that entire day, and she was the only one who gave anything at all. He paused, and then his eyes found Maya directly, across the crowded room, and held there. That woman is here tonight. Every head at Maya's table turned toward her at once. Heat rushed up her neck and into her face as the room began to understand, murmurs rising into something closer to astonished whispers. Maya Brooks, Ethan said, is the reason I'm standing on this stage tonight instead of somewhere pretending nothing happened. Out of hundreds of people in this city, she was the only stranger who treated me like I mattered, when she had every reason not to. Maya sat frozen, tears rising unexpectedly as the weight of the moment settled over her. Shock, disbelief, and something far more complicated stirring underneath it. The man she'd fed out of simple instinct, the man she'd laughed with at a soup kitchen assuming he was just another regular person like her, was one of the wealthiest men in the country. And judging by the careful, deliberate way he'd built up to this moment, Maya had the distinct feeling this revelation was only the beginning of something much bigger. The applause after Ethan's speech felt distant to Maya, like it was happening somewhere far away instead of in the room she was sitting in. People turned to look at her with a mixture of admiration and disbelief, some reaching over to squeeze her hand or pat her shoulder, but Maya barely registered any of it. Her mind was still catching up to the fact that the tired stranger from the park bench was a billionaire who had just told an entire room about her. Ethan found her after the ceremony ended, guests slowly filtering out of the ballroom, and asked if they could talk privately. Maya followed him to a quieter side room, arms crossed, still processing. You could have told me, she said, before he'd even fully closed the door. At the soup kitchen. Before all of this. I know, Ethan admitted. And I'm sorry for that. But I needed to understand something first, before I said anything to you at all. Understand what? Ethan hesitated for a moment, then decided she deserved the whole truth immediately, without any more delay. I know about Halden Freight, he said quietly. I know what really happened 6 years ago, and I know it wasn't you. Maya went very still. Nobody had said those words to her in 6 years. Not her old co-workers, not the handful of friends who distanced themselves after the accusation, not a single person outside her own home. She'd carried the weight of that unresolved suspicion for so long that hearing someone state its opposite so plainly almost knocked the breath out of her. How do you know that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because I had it investigated properly, Ethan said. Real investigators, real forensic accountants, going through everything from the original discrepancies you flagged to the accounts your former supervisor and 2 other executives were actually funneling money through. You were right 6 years ago, Maya. You found real fraud, and instead of being believed, you were punished for finding it. Tears welled up before Maya could stop them, and this time she didn't try to hide it. 6 years of doors closing in her face, 6 years of background checks flagging an accusation that was never even proven, 6 years of believing, somewhere quietly underneath everything, that maybe people had been right not to trust her. Gregory Voss, she said slowly, the name still sitting bitterly on her tongue even after all this time. He's the one who reported me, isn't he? He's the one who orchestrated the entire thing, Ethan confirmed, along with two other senior managers. They resigned quietly before the internal investigation concluded, and the company let the whole thing fade rather than admit their own oversight had failed for 2 years. Maya sat down slowly, absorbing everything. What happens now? Now, we make it right, Ethan said. Properly. Not just quietly clearing your name behind closed doors, but making sure it's public and undeniable, so nobody can ever question it again. True to his word, the following week moved faster than Maya could have imagined. With Priya's documentation fully assembled, the case was reopened through independent investigators, separate from Halden Freight entirely, ensuring no conflict of interest could bury the truth a second time. The evidence was airtight: financial records, internal communications, forensic account trails that traced every fraudulent transfer directly back to Voss and his associates, with dates that lined up precisely against Maya's original internal report. Halden Freight, facing the very public possibility of a scandal, Ethan's legal team made clear they were prepared to pursue relentlessly, issued a formal public apology, officially clearing Maya's name and acknowledging the internal investigation 6 years earlier had been fundamentally flawed. Voss and the two other executives, no longer protected by quiet resignations, faced formal legal consequences for financial misconduct, their years of clean reputations finally catching up with the truth they'd buried. Maya sat in a small legal office the day the settlement was finalized, staring at documents that officially, undeniably, restored 6 years of her life she thought she'd never get back. "I still don't understand something," she told Ethan afterward, as they stood outside the building. "You could have just given me money that day on the park bench, once you found out who I really was. Why go through all of this first?" Ethan considered the question carefully before answering. "Because money wouldn't have fixed what actually happened to you," he said. "You didn't need charity, Maya. You needed the truth to be acknowledged. If I'd just handed you a check, it would have felt like I was buying my way out of guilt, and it wouldn't have changed a single thing about the lie that followed you for 6 years." Maya nodded slowly, understanding settling over her. "There's one more thing," Ethan added. "Now that your name is cleared, I'd like to offer you something. A leadership position at my company, overseeing community outreach and employee support programs. Not as charity, because I've watched how you treat people, Maya, even when you had every reason to keep something for yourself. That's the kind of person who should be running programs meant to actually help people, instead of just checking boxes on a corporate report." Maya stared at him, stunned into silence for the second time in 2 weeks. "You don't have to answer right now," Ethan added gently. "Take some time." But Maya already knew, standing there with 6 years of unfair suspicion finally lifted off her shoulders, exactly what her answer was going to be. 8 months later, Maya stood in front of a newly renovated building on the same street where her old apartment's broken security gate used to creak in the wind. The building had once been an abandoned warehouse, the kind of place people walked past without a second glance. Now it had a fresh coat of paint, wide windows, and a simple sign above the entrance that read, "The Brookshart Community Center." Maya had argued against putting her name on it for weeks. Ethan had insisted, telling her that a center built to help people rebuild their lives should carry the name of someone who understood exactly what that felt like, not just the name of whoever had funded it. She'd finally agreed, on the condition that his name came second. The opening ceremony was smaller than the charity gala where everything had first come to light, but it felt more meaningful to Maya in every way that mattered. There were no unfamiliar faces in expensive suits pretending to care about causes they'd forget by morning. Instead, there were people from her old neighborhood, former co-workers from the grocery store, kids from the soup kitchen who'd grown a little taller since she'd last seen them, and her daughter, now 8, wearing a small blazer she'd insisted on picking out herself for the occasion. The center offered exactly what Maya wished had existed 6 years earlier: free legal consultations for wrongful termination and workplace disputes, job placement assistance with actual follow-through instead of empty promises, emergency meal programs for families going through what she once had, and a small childcare space so parents searching for work didn't have to choose between job interviews and their kids. Maya walked through the building slowly during a quiet moment before the ceremony officially began, running her hand along a hallway wall painted a soft, warm yellow. She thought about the version of herself from 8 months ago, exhausted on a park bench, splitting a sandwich with a stranger without a single expectation attached to it. She hadn't been trying to change anyone's life that day. She'd just seen someone who looked hungry and had food to share. Ethan found her there, standing quietly in the hallway, and for a moment neither of them said anything. It still doesn't feel real, Maya admitted. Any of it. It's real, Ethan said. You built this. I just wrote checks. Maya laughed softly, shaking her head. You did a lot more than write checks, and you know it. They walked together toward the center's main room, where the opening ceremony crowd had begun to gather, chairs filling with people whose lives this building was meant to change in the months and years ahead. Before they reached the podium, Ethan stopped her for a moment, his expression more serious than the occasion probably called for. I want to tell you something, he said. Something I haven't said yet. Maya waited. That day on the park bench, Ethan continued. I'd built an entire company from nothing, made more money than I could ever spend in a lifetime. And I genuinely believed hard work was the only difference between people who succeeded and people who didn't. I thought I understood something about the world because I'd built something big in it. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. You taught me I didn't understand anything at all. You had every reason to walk past me that day like everyone else did. You had less than almost anyone I encountered, and you gave more than anyone else in that entire city. That's not something hard work alone explains. That's just who you are. Maya felt her eyes sting slightly, though she blinked it back, glancing toward the crowd gathering just beyond them. I only shared my lunch because you looked hungry, she said simply, the same way she'd said it back on that very first day. That's all it ever was. I know, Ethan said. That's exactly what made it mean something. The ceremony began shortly after, with Maya standing at the podium this time instead of sitting quietly in a crowd. She spoke briefly about the center's mission, about second chances, about the difference between charity that made people feel small and support that helped people stand back up on their own. She didn't mention the sandwich, or the park bench, or Ethan's public speech 8 months earlier. She didn't need to. Everyone in that room already knew the story by now, passed quietly from person to person through the neighborhood like a small piece of proof that kindness still occasionally found its way back around. Afterward, as the crowd mingled through the center's new rooms, Maya's daughter tugged at her sleeve, asking if they could see the childcare room one more time before they left. Maya took her hand, glancing back briefly at Ethan, who was deep in conversation with a young man asking about the job placement program, patient and unhurried in a way the old version of him probably never would have been. Ethan Hart had built one of the largest logistics companies in the country through calculated decisions, careful risk, and relentless ambition. But standing in that hallway months later, watching Maya walk her daughter through a building meant to give other families a fighting chance, he understood clearly that none of his business deals had ever taught him what one shared lunch on an ordinary afternoon had. Somewhere in that city, hundreds of people had walked past a stranger without a second glance that day. Only one person had stopped. And that single, unremarkable act of kindness, a sandwich split in half, offered without hesitation or expectation, had quietly rewritten the course of 2 lives forever.